counting down the planet's top 20 podcasts this week. You're listening to the Podcast Chart Show with Clark Hartwell.
Massive welcome along to the Podcast Tonight Chart Show. You're with myself, Clark Hartwell, and it's New Year's Eve. So it's time to start taking off those Christmas jumpers, put Monopoly in the cupboard for another year, and stop eating copious amounts of turkey. Before we start the countdown to 2024, we have a very special countdown of our own to do. It's time to take a look at this week's top 20 podcasts from around the globe.
This is the Podcast Tonight Chart Show.
This time last week, for our very first ever chart show, the awesome Lex Fridman Podcast made it to the number one spot. But will he make it to 2 weeks at the top of the charts? Or will we have a new podcast making it to number one this week?
Number one.
This week on the Podcast Tonight Chart Show, we have 11 new entries, 3 non-movers, and 2 new podcasts fighting it out for the number one spot.
Clark Hartwell, counting down this week's podcast chart.
In at 20 this week, we have a new entry knocking last week's TED Talks Daily out of the charts. It's the Rotten Mango Podcast, hosted by Stephanie So.
This is the Podcast Tonight Chart Show. Number 20.
And there was this giant pot of curry at the event that everyone is just like flocking towards. It's hot, it's steamy, which honestly feels like the last thing that you want to eat on a hot summer day. But the smell that is emanating out of that giant pot of curry, it smelled so freaking delicious. And it looked like the pot of curry had just arrived. So people start lining up, and this 40-ish-year-old woman starts filling up bowls of hot, steaming curry to feed people. And within minutes, everybody is doubled over, vomiting into the grass. Some of them, like, think of your local summer festival. Some of them are laying on the grass on their backs. Others are in a fetal position with all of these stomach spasms. 4 people would die from eating that curry.
Experience the best podcast the planet has to offer at podcasttonight.com.
It's New Year's Eve and we're running through this week's top 20 podcasts, and we have a new entry in at 19 this week, knocking Meghan Markle's Archetypes straight out of the charts with Bert Kreischer and Tom Seguras. Hilarious 2 Bears, 1 Cave podcast. And it's in at 19 this week.
This is the Podcast Tonight Chart Show. Number 19.
This time has this new feature where out of nowhere it'll just give a thumbs up, like someone liked it. And I think it's if you say a word, and all of a sudden, I guess I was like, I like that. And FaceTime gives a thumbs up. She's like, hold on, who's in this? She thought I was live streaming it.
Does she like to watch you do it?
No.
Does she like to watch you JUD?
Yeah, well, you know what? Yes. Yeah. She has gotten, and I don't know the right way to say this. I know that I know she wants to keep the majority of this private, but like she has gotten.
Yeah, really? I know that she doesn't want me to do this. Go ahead.
You're tuned into Podcast Tonight Radio. You're listening to Podcast Tonight.
Thanks for joining myself, Clark Hartwell, on the Podcast Tonight Chart Show. We have another new entry in 18 this week, and it's The Ramsey Show, hosted by Dave Ramsey and co-hosts. The Straight Talking Financial Podcast helps to build wealth and financial freedom no matter what your situation is, and that's why we love this show, and we find them in at 18 in the charts today.
Number 18.
Live from the headquarters of Ramsey Solutions, it's The Ramsey Show, where we help people build wealth, do work that they love, and create actual amazing relationships. Open phones this hour as we talk about your life and your money. It's a free call, and some say the advice is worth exactly what you pay for it. The number is 888-825-5225. That's 888-825-5225. Dr. John Deloney, number 1 best-selling author, Ramsey personality, and host of the Dr. John Deloney Show, a very, very popular podcast on the Ramsey Networks, is my co-host today.
Follow us on our socials at Podcast Tonight.
A massive new entry for Theo Von and his podcast This Past Week, where each week Theo interacts with his guests and listeners to bring you a fantastic weekly podcast. And you'll find it at 17 in the charts this week.
This is the Podcast Tonight Chart Show. Number 17.
We made it. Merry Christmas to you. Happy holidays to you. If you don't celebrate Christmas, some people don't, or they celebrate it, but they don't care about Jesus or whatever, or, they don't, I don't care if some people celebrate Lloyd Christmas. and that's fine too. You know, it's whoever your deity is. People have different deities and leaders. Some people love, Jesus. Some people love Buddha. Whatever, you know what I'm saying? There's different deities that people believe in.
This is Podcast Tonight.
Welcome back, and slipping down the charts from number 6 and into 16 is the Iced Coffee Hour with hosts Graham Stephen and Jack Selby. As they continue to interview top-tier guests and delve into their unique lifestyles, the Iced Coffee Hour is this week's number 16.
This is the Podcast Tonight Chart Show. Number 16.
A person who has $1 million. For the most,
he's as close to broke as you can be.
Your daughters.
Yeah.
Would you want them to be happy?
No, I want them to be productive. The only thing worse than investing in a house is giving money to the bank and letting them have it. People are being told a bunch of lies. Buy a house and one day you're going to be fine. Invest in an IRA, you're going to be fine. And they said, I'm going to be fine if I just do these things. But we know that most Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. The U.S. dollar is likely to fail. People know it, yet they save it. Get a fucking t-shirt. I am broke. And on the back, and I am hustling.
Keep up to date with us. Search your socials for @Podcast Tonight.
Moving up a spot from last week's 16 and into 15 is Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO, where his podcast takes a look at the remarkable stories of the people that define culture, achieve greatness, and created stories worth studying. Stephen's latest guest is none other than Michael Bublé.
Number 15.
Well, I'm a feeling good. But in a moment, my son's cancer diagnosis was a sledgehammer to my reality. And I remember saying to myself, if we get out of this, I'm living a different life. And I feel like I'm at this point where I want to do something different.
Michael, you're not going to quit music, are you?
Clark Hartwell, counting down this week's podcast chart.
True crime stories, creepy history, and all things spooky is this week's new entry at 14, and it's a heavyweight in the true crime podcast category. Hosted by Ashley and Elena, Morbid is in at 14 this week.
This is the Podcast Tonight Chart Show. Number 14.
Rule. And you know what? Growing up, one of our holiday traditions together was watching The Wizard of Oz as a whole fam. So we couldn't think of a more fitting way to spend today than to revisit the fan favorite episode 281, The Dark Side of the Wizard of Oz. Take a trip with us over the actual rainbow and hear about its unsettling history and the actual peril that the actors went through to create one of history's greatest classic films.
Enjoy the holiday break, you guys, and we will be back on Thursday. Ho, ho, ho. Merry Ashmas.
The Podcast Tonight Chart Show with Clark Hartwell.
Pulling back the curtain on television, movies, journalism and more with Richard Osman and Marina Hyde, using their years of knowledge, enviable contact book and charm to bring you what's hot and what's not in the world of entertainment. It's another new entry at 13 this week. The Rest is Entertainment Podcast.
Number 13.
There is one that a number of people have asked, which is, what is your favourite celebrity story of the year? For me, there is no contest. It is the Gwyneth Paltrow ski massacre trial.
Oh, yeah.
If you remember, this was the situation where either Gwyneth Paltrow skied into a retired ophthalmologist in Utah, or a retired ophthalmologist skied into Gwyneth Paltrow. You've heard of sort of low stakes drama. This I liked because it was a no stakes drama. I don't know quite why the ophthalmologist bought the case, but
keep up to date with us. Search your socials for @Podcast Tonight.
Tech Talk with Matthew Dickinson slips 8 spots down the charts from last week's 4th place, sliding all the way down to number 12 this week.
This is the Podcast Tonight Chart Show. Number 12.
Hello, podcast devotees. Merry Christmas to you all, wherever you are in the world. We're stepping through piles of paper and busted boxes and all the bits of Christmas flotsam and jetsam that accumulate so rapidly on the living room floor today. Now, don't mind the mess here at Tech Talk. We have heaps more presents to open yet. And here, carrying a humongous red sack, splitting at the seams, sweating it out in full Santa suit in 41-degree heat. Oh, that was a mistake, Matt. It's Matthew Dickinson. Season's greetings to you, Matt.
Oh, it does sound hot, doesn't it? So, yes, you're right. This is being released on Christmas Day. That's how dedicated we are here. Christmas Day being released so people can sit around and, I don't know, maybe take it easy on Christmas afternoon and say, let's just listen to a bit of...
Put podcast on the background, turn off the carols for just a little bit. Give us 45 minutes carol-free. And
That's right. And look, at this time of the year, I thought the first thing I'd just talk about in general conversation was a nice little launch that I went to recently around the Rural Fire Service Aviation Centre of Excellence launch of the opening of this new building, this new facility. Obviously, this time of year in Australia, bushfires, I'm sure there are some going as we speak somewhere because they're probably happening somewhere in Australia all the time at this time of year.
Clark Hartwell, counting down this week's podcast chart.
Welcome back to the Podcast Tonight chart show, and a massive congratulations to Tech Talk Podcast for their second week in at the charts. And new to the podcast world and taking it by storm is true crime podcast Mortal Sin, and it places straight in at number 11 this week.
Number 11.
Jurors held Pastor Nick Hackney's freedom in their hands. The question was whether they were prepared to convict him of murder, based not just on some newly discovered forensic science, but also on the word of church prophetess Sandy Glass. In this episode, the verdict and the damage the case did.
I think without question, it left a kind of scar on the community.
How it drove some from the church.
I would say you can't walk into any organization, church included, without your head screwed on. You can have a direct relationship with God. You don't need it to go through another person.
The court ruling that no one saw coming.
Don's family was there. There were members of the congregation. They were upset by this.
And what Nick Hackney is doing these days.
Experience the best podcast the planet has to offer at podcasttonight.com.
You're listening to the Podcast Night chart show. We've counted down from 20 to 11. It's time to get into this week's top 10 podcasts from around the globe.
Clark Hartwell, counting down this week's podcast chart. Follow us on our socials at Podcast Tonight.
And it's another new entry this week with best friends G-Rex and her partner in crime Dirty Skittles, keeping each other sane with their humour and conversations of relationships, parenting and even mental health. This week's number 10 is shit that goes on in our heads.
Number 10.
This week it was nice, and it's been kind of bipolar where it'll go up and down, and it was like in the 90s 2 weeks ago, and then it went down into like the 50s or 40s. But I was in Texas for a while beforehand, so I kind of like the fall. Like I missed the fall when I was in the South, so it's nice. I don't mind it. It's fine.
It's fine until you walk outside in your flip-flops without any socks on, and it's 38 degrees out because you didn't bother to look before you walked outside.
Yes. I know. I remember in college, I was like walking around on the ice and stuff, and then when you fall, you're like, no one saw that, right? Like,
I remember upstate New York, and I got to a point where it was just ice. And I would walk across the street to get a coffee and walk back across. And this one time I slipped and fell and I didn't spill my coffee. And I was like, yes, like I fell, hurt myself, but coffee is here intact. We're good.
Clark Hartwell, counting down this week's podcast chart.
Welcome along. It's New Year's Eve and we're counting down this week's top 20 podcasts from around the globe. We've arrived inside this week's top 10 and we'll soon find out if Lex Fridman has made it to 2 weeks at the top of the charts.
This is the Podcast Tonight chart show.
And in at 9 this week, Breaking Barriers with host Jeff Crank. And it's a new entry for the American Potential podcast.
Number 9.
You know, people these days are pretty cynical about our government, and who can blame them? Washington is out of control. Political corruption and division gets worse every year. But even though there's so much going wrong in our country, I'm still optimistic that America's best days are ahead. How come? As part of my day job with Americans for Prosperity, I meet incredible Americans every day fighting for the cause of freedom. My name is Jeff Crank, and I'm hosting the American Potential Podcast because I believe people need to know that there's still hope for this country, but we need to take action now. I have a simple belief. Americans are capable of extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so.
and I'm going out to prove it. From inspiring stories of everyday heroes to cutting-edge research and thought-provoking interviews with renowned experts, we're going to show Americans how we can use the power of freedom and opportunity to create lasting prosperity. Join me as we take a deep dive into how we can unlock our fullest potential as a country. I hope you'll join me on this inspirational journey that will leave you feeling empowered and informed about the future of our great nation. Visit AmericanPotential.com to learn more.
Clark Hartwell, counting down this week's podcast chart.
Thank you and welcome back to the Podcast Tonight chart show with myself, Clark Hartwell. Interviewing entertainers, CEOs, actors and more is a new entry straight in at 8 this week for host Trevor Noah and his What Now podcast.
This is the Podcast Tonight chart show. Number 8.
Happy Mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass Day, everybody.
Happy Karen Bass Day.
Happy Karen Bass Day. I love speaking to mayors because after years and years of speaking to politicians, I have been told by, I would say like the majority of politicians, that mayors have the most direct impact on your life. Like if you live in a city, a mayor has more of an impact on your life than the president of your country does. And most people don't think this. Most people are out there in the streets, especially in America. I've noticed like in America, it's all about national politics. Christiana, I feel like of all of us, you have the highest stake in this conversation because you are a resident of Los Angeles.
I do.
Are you not?
And, you know, I've had some experience with mayors. Boris Johnson was the mayor of London and then became the prime minister. So I have a lot of feelings. I've had the worst mayors. I had de Blasio and Boris Johnson. And Karen, I have no view of it right now because she's currently reigning as the mayor.
You're tuned into Podcast Tonight Radio. You're listening to Podcast Tonight.
It's New Year's Eve. Welcome. We're counting our way down to the top podcast spot for the last chart show of 2023. Drop us a comment where you'll be celebrating New Year's Eve this evening. We are currently recording from Bangkok in Thailand.
This is the Podcast Tonight chart show.
And placing in at the number 7 spot this week, sliding all the way down from last week's number 2, is Last Podcast on the Left.
Number 7.
Let's take fucking health advice from the vet.
I do. I believe you.
He
I
drinks
dog blood all the time.
No, this came from a Holocaust survivor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so my father, this is according to an email, my father worked with an older guy who'd once worked with an even older guy that had survived living in a Nazi concentration camp by drinking Nazi horse blood.
He was alive for thousands of years. He couldn't see light.
Yes. You choose wisely. You see, he was a veterinarian, and he kept his job as a prisoner taking care of the Nazis' horses. And when he had the chance, he would tap into one of them with a needle, drain a cup to drink on the spot, and another cup to sneak back to his family if he could risk it at the time. Horses have loads of blood. So he was able to supplement his diet for a long time. Like I had a horse when I was growing up called Blood Bag. Love that horse.
Mm,
Love the big sloppy blood bag horse.
Just put a fucking keg spigot in it.
Clark Hartwell, counting down this week's podcast chart.
It's New Year's Eve. Welcome back. This is the Podcast Tonight chart show, and there's comedy all around us in at 6 this week with Jason, Sean and Will's hilariously funny Smartless podcast.
Number 6.
I'm waiting for the 3 guys. Jason, Sean, and Will. But I don't know what happened with them. Maybe their equipment doesn't work, or maybe everything doesn't work. Who knows what's going on here? But welcome to Smartless. Smart.
Jason, what did you do last night? I know what you did. You went to the Lakers game.
Yes, had a great time. Really fun. I hosted 3 11-year-olds, one of which was my daughter.
Was it fun?
It was really fun.
Did they win?
They did win. They tried to lose, but they fixed it there at the end. And it was a hoot. I've heard people describe fun things as.
That's fun.
That's fun.
Yeah. I like going to the Lakers game. It's fun.
And then today I was going to do some cooking, but then I heard that I think, Sean, maybe you might have mentioned to Amanda that no one's interested in eating or was it you, Will?
No, it's
no one's
Sean.
interested in, Sean, what I was planning on cooking.
Experience the best podcast the planet has to offer at podcasttonight.com.
Sliding all the way down and out of last week's number one spot and into this week's top 5 is the fantastic Lex Fridman Podcast.
This is the Podcast Tonight Chart Show. Number 5.
When I was going to this conversation with Teddy, I was ready to talk boxing. Styles, matches, techniques, tactics, and his analysis of individual fighters like Mike Tyson, Michael Moore, Klitschko's, Usyk, Povetkin, Lomachenko, Triple G, Canelo, Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Leonard, Hagler, Duran, Floyd, and on and on and on. Like I said, I came ready to talk boxing, but I stayed for something even bigger. The Shakespearean human story of Teddy Atlas, Cus D'Amato, and Mike Tyson. It's a story about loyalty, betrayal, fear, and greatness. It's a story where nobody is perfect and everybody is human. To summarize, in the early 80s, young trainer Teddy Atlas worked with his mentor, Cus D'Amato, in training the young boxing protege, now a boxing legend, Mike Tyson.
Keep up to date with us. Search your socials for @PodcastTonight.
With Lex Fridman in at 5 this week, it means that we do have a new number one spot for our New Year's Eve chart special. And remaining in the charts for 2 weeks in a row is last week's number 10 spot, Geeks, Geezers and Googleization.
Number 4.
Here are your hosts, Ira Wolf and Jason Cochran.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization. This is our final show of 2023. Hard to believe that. Thank you for being part of Googleization Nation. I'm Ira Wolf.
And I'm Jason Cochran. If you think this is just another podcast, think again. We're the voice of the most important conversations on the future of work confronting business leaders and people today. And our goal is to bring you ways to reimagine tomorrow and explore the ever-changing convergence of business, technology, and people.
Well, today is not just any episode, it's our year-end special, where we look back at the remarkable journey we've taken throughout 2023. And I can't believe how fast the year's gone.
It's gone super fast, Ira. And as we say goodbye to another incredible year, it's time to reflect on the evolution of our discussions. So, you know, because you started GGG many years ago, when GGG started in the fall of 2018, we spent a lot of time talking about recruitment, which led to a lot of conversations about HR technology.
The Podcast Tonight Chart Show with Clark Hartwell.
Thanks for sticking around. It's the Podcast Tonight Chart Show, and we've made it to the top 3. And I can tell you there are no more new entries. Our top 3 this week were all charted last week. And in at the number 3 spot is Tracy Brinkman's epic Dark Horse Entrepreneur podcast.
Number 3.
You ever looked at your inbox and thought, just another bunch of damn emails? Yeah, me too. Well, I want you to hold on to your hats because today I kind of unearthed a treasure trove of wisdom in the most likely of places. Yeah, my email inbox. From marketing mishaps to golden nuggets of entrepreneurial savvy, I want to share with you 10.5 eye-opening lessons that are going to change the way you view your inbox forever. And trust me, you're not going to want to miss this half lesson that's going to be at the very end because it's mighty magic. So, you ready to dive in and discover the unexpected lessons lurking in your inbox? Well, then let's get started. Hey there, audacious parents. Welcome to the Dark Horse Entrepreneur Podcast, where we're not just about surviving, we're about thriving. If you're tuning in, you're not looking for just another feel-good, pat-on-the-back kind of show. No. You're here because you're ready to disrupt the status quo. You're ready because you're here to challenge your limits and to step out of the comfort zone where we know growth never happens. This is not just your average, let's all be happy with our 9-to-5 lives kind of podcast. We're here to give you actionable strategies. We're here to dive deep into the world of side hustles, digital marketing, and smart income-boosting tactics. Why, you may ask? Because we're designed for parents like you, parents juggling family expenses, childcare, and the elusive me time. We're not just about making money, though. We're about designing a life that you dictate, not one that's been prepackaged in a soul-sucking 9-to-5 box. So, if you're ready to break free and design a life that aligns with your dreams, design a life that aligns with your family, you're in the right place. The Dark Horse Entrepreneur Podcast.
Clark Hartwell, counting down this week's podcast chart.
Welcome back. It's New Year's Eve, and we only have 2 podcasts left finding out for the last number 1 spot of 2023. Last week, Crime Junkie charted in at number 8, and the Huberman Lab placed in at 13. And today, one of those podcasts will make it to the number 1 position.
Number 2.
In at number 2 this week is Andrew Huberman's All Things Neuroscience podcast, the Huberman Lab.
Number 2.
I definitely sleep better with the phone out of the bedroom. Some people are now turning off their Wi-Fi at night. I think you and I are both really aligned in the sense that we've seen enough things come and go in the health space, like disparaging remarks about lifting weights, like that's just for bodybuilders, and now everybody knows.
Yeah, muscle bound. You become muscle bound.
Right. Now men and women, elderly and young, are encouraged to do resistance training. Yoga used to be cast in this kind of magic carpet realm, breath work. All of this stuff has become over time mainstream, but it's taken a very long time, and the road has been choppy and sometimes, in my opinion, really unfair to the practices and their value. I mean, these are zero cost practices in many cases that can really help people. And so when I look at something like sunscreen or Bluetooth headphones, or we're talking about some of these things, I wish I had a portal into the future where we look back and go, like, of course.
The Podcast Tonight Chart Show with Clark Hartwell.
A massive congratulations to all the podcasts that charted this week on our show. We've counted down the top 20 podcasts from around the world, and your number 1 podcast this week is the chart topping Crime Junkie podcast.
The wait is over. This is this week's number 1 podcast. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1.
After taking a bit of time off work, September 23rd, 1986 is Sergeant Cliff Ash's first day back at work. And as you can imagine, that means catching up on everything he's missed. I'm sure he's assuming it'll be an easy day, considering the small community of Phillip Island, Australia, is typically pretty crime-free. So he should be able to catch up on a bunch of paperwork that's piled up. But about 9:05 in the morning, when 2 men walk into the station, his easy first day back is shattered. Sergeant Ash actually knows these guys. They're Donald Cameron and Ian Cans, who are part of the prominent Cameron family. The family owns a bunch of land. They have deep political ties there on the island. So in the community where everyone knows everyone really knows the Camerons. Anyway, Sergeant Ash asks what he can do for them, and Donald mutters something about there having been some kind of domestic disturbance, and then he starts rambling about something having to do with family fights and this affair that his brother Fergus was having with this young woman named Beth Barnard, and it doesn't make a ton of sense, but eventually, like 10 minutes into this rambling, Sergeant Ash interrupts Donald and is like, "What are you getting at?" And Donald says, quote, "It's Beth. I think she's not well." So it's after he says this that he finally gets to what I think is crucial information they may have wanted to start with. And he says that he had just been over at Beth's farmhouse where they found her.
Number 1. Number 1.
Thanks for tuning in to the Podcast Tonight chart show. This week, Crime Junkie made it to the top of the charts. We will be back next Sunday, counting down the charts once again. Wherever you're spending New Year's Eve tonight, have lots of fun, stay safe, and a Happy New Year to you all.
This is the Podcast Tonight Chart Show. Thanks for tuning in to the Podcast Tonight Chart Show. We're back, counting down the podcast next Sunday.